Hey everybody, Liam here. You might have noticed this episode is titled differently to the rest, so I just wanted to jump in right at the start to let you know a little bit more about what this is. So basically, for a while now, we've wanted to interview developers on the podcast, especially those responsible for games that mean a lot to us. We've been talking about how we might do this since the days of redacted podcast. I can never tell whether that bit has lost its juice yet, and we've always struggled to find a way that works for us. You see, the thing we love the most about Indieventure is that it's basically just a long, chaotic Discord call that we publish to the wider world. However, that's not a vibe that's very compatible with a traditional interview format. The thought of forcing a developer to sit quietly while we talk about Robinson's squash for 40 minutes feels, illegal, to be honest. So instead, we've decided to split interviews away from the main podcast and release them as smaller bonus episodes, like the one you're listening to today. Except this one is actually being released in a regular slot because none of us were free to record this week. But moving forward, the plan is to release these in between regular episodes. Although I'm sure we'll always experiment with the format, and indeed, this is just an experiment, it might not stick around, but expect these episodes to be shorter, more focused, and usually hosted by just one of us instead of all three. We're chaotic together. Sometimes we need to be separated. Today's episode is a conversation with Will Todd and James Carbutt, the co-founders of Cold Supper, who recently released Thank Goodness You're Here to critical acclaim. I had a great time interviewing them both, even if, as you will hear, I was a little nervous. It might surprise you to learn that I don't interview many game developers at Greg's, so I guess I'm a little rusty. If you enjoyed this episode, or you have any feedback, please feel free to get in touch via our email, contact@indieventurepodcast.co.uk. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show. My guests today are the co-founders of Cold Supper, the developers of the recently released Thank Goodness You're Here, a comedy adventure about a miniature salesman who is tasked with a series of increasingly bizarre odd jobs by the residents of Barnsley, a fictional North Yorkshire village famous for its enormous pies, talking worms, and butter-smeared pasties. I finished the game last week and found it to be one of the funniest games I've ever had the pleasure of playing. Tightly written and beautifully presented, Thank Goodness You're Here is a love letter to absurdist British comedy that is sure to be hailed as one of this year's best indie releases. A big hello to Cold Supper's technical lead, Will Todd.
Hey, how's it going?
And lead illustrator, James Carbutt.
Hello.
So, we're recording this on Wednesday the 31st of July, which means that the game is set to release tomorrow. Reviews have also been dropping this week. Each one of them is glowing as the last, which personally doesn't surprise me. I'm already failing on this not blowing too much smoke up your asses part. I'm aware of that. I know the game's been in development for several years. How are you both feeling right now?
Yeah, it's surreal. It's weird. In a way, it almost feels like another work day, but also just like, yeah, for the longest time, we were working on it in secret as well. So like one of the biggest, strangest moments was like the reveal and seeing people's like initial reactions to it. But yeah, it's just mad to see the reviews coming in, and got a strange tingling all over my bones. I think it's going to take like a few, like maybe weeks even to sort of like be able to process it all after all this time.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like Will says, it's like on the one hand we're just in the same office doing the same sorts of things, but on the other hand, somewhere in the world, someone will press go game and it'll just be released into the wild. So it's very weird.
Yeah, can only imagine. How long have you been working on it for then?
I dread to think.
Yeah, I think it's been about 4 years.
Wow, okay, yeah. So it's definitely the end of a long journey then. Before we get into the game itself, I'd love to get to know a little bit more about you both as individuals. So for starters, how do you both know each other?
Go on,
So
Will.
we met. Yeah, you want to do the routine? We have this down to a T now, unfortunately.
Oh, do you really?
We started doing this like when we were pitching the funding.
Friends for ages.
Me and James have been friends for ages. We met in high school.
Well, me and Will have been friends for ages. We met in secondary school. We met when we were like, I think 12 or 13 maybe, and we were friends in school, and then kind of went like our own ways after uni, different unis, different jobs and stuff. And then we came back around. One day we had like the good idea to do like a fun weekend project, and then somehow 6 years elapsed, and now we have like a full game.
It's nice that you ended up finding each other again in that way. So you both grew up in Barnsley, is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
feels like that will be incredibly relevant for some questions later on. I'd love to know what your history is with games in general, sort of your relationship with them up until now. Will, maybe you'd like to go first.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I've been pretty one track about it, like my entire life. Since I was a kid, I'd be like the sort of the prototypical ideas guy. And then I sort of like transferred into ideas for games when, I got my first console. It was like a PS1. It's what I did after secondary school in college, and then later in university. I studied games technology. It's kind of what I've always wanted to do. I think sort of like it was always the end goal, and it's a really difficult industry to break into through like the conventional means of just getting a job at like a studio. It's ultra competitive, and it's something I was like slowly building towards. But yeah, like Jim said, we sort of just had this idea of let's do that little weekend thing. And then, the 2 days went by and we barely had anything apart from the little naked guy wandering around. But yeah, it just seemed like it was working and we kind of stuck it out.
Yeah, I don't have quite as close a tie to like the industry, I guess, as Will does. Like I went to uni to do like graphic design, and that was kind of my gig for ages, doing like motion design and graphic design stuff. But I also always had this like weird illustration sort of stuff on the side that I would always do, like quite literally like on the side of my lecture notes and stuff. Like that's where a lot of that developed, just from not paying attention. And then luckily, we was kind of able to like put it together with Will for like the first sort of big project. And I think not coming from a games background has been really useful, because a lot of the, like orthodoxies that you're used to, I don't really know what they are. I've not like come up through that like pipeline, I guess. So it's been cool to kind of like I don't know, start with a blank slate, which hasn't always made things easier, but is hopefully comes out with some interesting stuff.
I do think you can maybe see a bit of that in the games that you've both made as well. I think there is a refreshing approach to what like mechanical and design in general. So I can definitely understand
I think a
that.
big area it comes through hopefully is like the composition of the shots and stuff. Like they're not typical like game compositions, I suppose, and it's because they've started from the sketch of someone who has no experience and is used to like watching, like cartoons and stuff. So they've like started there, and then we've had to like somehow jam gameplay into that composition, which has hopefully worked. I mean, that's why a lot of the shots, there's like not too much to do in them either, because like you take the shot with Big Ron and the big face. That was first and foremost, like let's do a big face and then have you running around the bottom, and not much more thought after that. And then we kind of like, luckily got to use a lot of these shots and compositions like in the gameplay.
So if we roll back a little bit to Good Time Garden, which was released in 2019, what was your approach to that game? So this was the first game you had made together, from what I understand. Yeah, how did you approach the creation of that?
I mean, that was very like haphazard. It was that sort of weekend. I don't know if we had like we definitely had like concepts. I think stuff like that came to us like quite quickly and easily. It's like, oh, what about this sort of thing? Or what about it's sort of like kind of inspired by this short film, and there's a little guy and he's going out to feed his family or something. And we do like mood boards and stuff, and like a lot of the conceptual stuff we could easily throw around, but when it comes to like getting it on proverbial paper, it's like a completely different story, and you kind of have to not compromise, but sort of like when you think like, okay, how does this work as a game in all the different ways that it has to, things kind of get shaped by the tools that you use. So it was really a weird iterative process where, okay, we've got like this little guy, and then okay, maybe he picks up food, and what's the food? Maybe it's like a mushroom, because we've got this strange sort of like psychedelic space going on. And then we got like, okay, the mushroom's done, he pops up, you can pick up a mushroom and put it back down. All right, what does this mean? Where do you put it? And things literally, we kind of like got things like moving around and like in there at like this final fidelity of animation
straight away
and mechanics, but then like it was just happening in like this non-space. So I think initially we had this idea that it was going to be this big sort of intertwining ecosystem that you'd sort of like poke and prod out. So like when you pick something up, something crawls out of the ground, and then that will interact with something else further away.
But that's hard.
But the scope, it's very hard to do. And the scope kind of shifted around like what we could do based on like our our skills, but also like our time, because we were working like day jobs, at points quite intense day jobs at this point. So it was in a way limited to like what we could do, and we were just completely knackered on an evening.
Yeah.
But then also by like what we'd done before, because we were doing it this sort of like locked in at this high fidelity, and we didn't have much time to sort of rework things. We were sort of just like designing the thing as we carved it out.
Yeah, and a lot of the design decisions were the first decision. Like we said, who's this guy? And then you'd say like maybe it's like a sloppy guy with like a big bum, and there was no more questioning beyond that. Like I went back home like a few months ago and I found like an A4 sheet of paper that had all the characters and locations listed, and none of them were crossed out, which means like the first thing we said, we wrote down and then did.
How do you find that as a process? Is there something about restricting yourself to not changing things that gives you more confidence in those decisions? Or do you sometimes you just like, God, I wish we'd never stuck with this particular thing?
I think we were the Good Time Garden, we just didn't interrogate anything, so it was like, let's just do the first thing we can do and then take it to completion, because like it's all up for grabs. We're in credit, we don't owe anyone anything, so like just whatever we say we can do. And then I think when it came to like Thank Goodness You're Here, it's something we really struggled with, like deciding what to keep in, what's worth polishing, what's worth cutting, and it sort of just comes down to a gut feeling, I guess. Like, especially with the comedy stuff, like, is that stuff funny to us still, like after 4 years? If it is, then it like stays in, and if it's not, then it's too late because it's already animated.
There's definitely also a worry at that point where like, is it only funny to us because it's become like a forced meme because we've just been saying it back and forward to each other for 4 years?
Yeah. To be fair, that's what the player gets too. There's enough repetition that they're in it with us.
That is true. You got me thinking when you were talking there. You described the main character in The Good Time Garden as a little guy. Are like little guys as protagonists like a motif that you expected to find Cold Supper, or was that accidental?
Yeah, I think going into Thank Goodness, we definitely first of all, we had no expectations for The Good Time Garden, or very little ones. And we're really like sort of like surprised by the positive reaction to that. So going into like another project, we're like, okay, we probably need to like scale up what we feel worked from this. So there's like some stylistic stuff, some mechanical stuff that sort of like we kind of carried over, and Weird Little Guy as a protagonist sort of came with it. Initially, though, I don't think there wasn't even really a player character. Like very early on, like before we shipped The Good Time Garden, we were bouncing around ideas for this new thing. It was very heavily driven by just like the visual composition, and maybe your interaction was something like, I don't know, you were wobbling like a plant pot in the background or something while some conversation played out. It was very sort of like pretentious highbrow stuff, but we kind of felt like it was an interesting concept, but again like sort of molded by the tools that we had, and eventually we were like, okay, it sort of made it make sense to have a protagonist play a character that has this sort of more conventional way of navigating the world.
I'd describe Thank Goodness You're Here as very confident in its identity. It's striking, right? It's bold and it's brash. I think you might have answered this a little bit, but did you set out to make this specific game, or did the final concept come together during development, during that iterative creative process you described before?
Definitely, I think during the process. Like, I would describe it as we had a very distinct tone of voice at the start of this thing, and we just didn't know what it was going to say, and we still don't really know. But yeah, I think we figured out along the way kind of so much of even the core of the game, like what the locations are, who the main characters are, who the player character is, was all decided, I would say, along the way.
And was part of that the inherent Britishness of it, or was that also something that you found during that process?
Yeah, there was definitely something that came later. I think that very first concept that was like no player character, just lots of weird compositions that you move between. That was like, I don't know what you had in your head, James, but like in my head, it was a sort of like vague Americana almost.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think it wasn't until the start of pre-production, or maybe, I don't know, maybe like when we were putting the first demo together.
Yeah.
that we were like fleshing out the characters and getting to this point where like we were doing like writing by just like saying stupid stuff to each other. And that just sounds like us because it's us saying it. So it sort of like started veering towards like okay, town, northern town. And what was it? It was like an offhand comment one of us made about like a bus pulling up past the welcome to Barnsworth sign or something. And they were like, okay, are we just doing it in Barnsley? And we kind of landed more on that. But I think also like around that time we were maybe struggling a little bit to sort of find direction, and then I basically one night binged all of Vic Reeves' Big Night Out, and I was like, yeah, I think this is like less like, oh, let's do this, more just like this is a sort of like the frequency. To be, I'm going to keep being pretentious and wanky. I'm riding off the high of the reviews that are going in, but it was like, okay, we want to kind of be like vibrate into this sort of like tone of voice, and that sort of like led us more towards the like, I don't know, British humor
sketch
as
comedy kind of
sort
thing.
of, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you've spoken about those influences in other interviews. Was that a shared interest that you had when you were younger, when you were first friends? Or is it something you kind of had separate and had never really discussed with each other?
I don't think it wasn't a hugely shared interest. I think we had sort of, because we have the same cultural background and same sense of humor and stuff, so like a lot of the stuff that we liked will have been similar, but it wasn't like, for me, I don't think it was like a key part of my childhood or anything like those comedy bits. I think it was just like later on in life we discovered how good they were, and they still held up. I don't know about you, Will.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's more like the case that we just sort of grew up together and had that sort of shared sense of humor. Then like the stuff we find funny is more or less the same thing.
Yeah,
like, I don't think I've never like shown you anything or vice versa. It was like, oh, this is hilarious, and not got it.
Yeah.
I think we both like,
Mrs. Brown's Boys.
That's true, actually. I kind of do like Mrs. Brown Boys. Don't put this
That's
in.
the
but,
one.
I don't know. I find it kind of charming in a sort of.
If I watch Mrs. Brown Boys and all the jokes, and thank goodness they're in Mrs. Brown Boys. Like, God damn it.
God, what if we exposed here?
Yeah, I am genuinely terrified that like, someone's gonna come out and someone's gonna be like, yeah, this is all just like SpongeBob quotes.
There's something in there, yeah, for sure. I just don't know what it is
Just absorbed through osmosis. When I wrote this next question, the reviews hadn't dropped, and I think the answer is no, but I'll ask it anyway. Was there any worry that players who might not be familiar with British culture might not get it? And did you even care if that would be the case?
I think there's different levels of caring. Like, I don't know. On a personal level, no, I didn't care. But financially, like commercially, like, yeah, it definitely was a bit of a concern. Like, yeah, ultimately we've made it like for, I don't know, the closer you are to the Dearne Valley, the more you're going to appreciate it. And like that drop off is probably quite harsh past a certain point. Being like, I don't know, outside of the UK, but having shown it at like PAX West in Seattle, and having obviously like a lot of Americans play it, one of the resounding points was like, oh yeah, I really like British comedy as like a genre. That's a frame of reference. So I don't think we weren't terribly worried that it was gonna like completely flop, but I think more European countries actually, it seems to not click as much there.
Yeah, I think it's the language barrier as well, I suppose.
Language barrier, yeah.
I think a good metric for this stuff is like, do you know Scott Benson, who like Midnight in the Woods?
Yes.
A really talented animator, and he had a good GDC where he mentioned like 90% of players should find 90% of the game, 10% of players should find only 10%, you know, or should find 10% hidden or whatever, and then like 1% of players will find like the 1% hidden. And I think that's a good metric where like hopefully 90% of players will get 90% of the jokes. And then there'll be like some in there where like, yeah, like Will says, the closer you are to Barnsley Town Hall, the more they'll resonate.
That makes total sense. I think I'm happy to be that 1% that noticed the 90s Greg's uniforms. Am I proud of that? I don't think I'm proud of that.
People don't like it when they are. They're like, oh God, I know what that means. There's jokes in there that are literally like for 4 people in Barnsley, and which is not a good financial decision to make when making a game.
I love that though. And I think it comes through because you don't pull any punches with British culture, but I do think you do it with a sense of love and endearment, maybe as much as we can about Britain. But I did personally as a player, I really appreciated that authentic look. Authentic. I mean, you know. So I'd love to know a little bit more about the game's art style. So, James, did you have any specific inspirations? Did its visual identity come naturally, or did it require a lot of iteration?
It's a weird mix of stuff for sure. It's just sort of what I've developed as my style, and like, I guess my illustration style came from kind of like graphic design influences. So like Jack Satch is a contemporary illustrator that I like a lot, and Sophie Coco Gate is another one, and then Chad Van Galen is like this musician and illustrator with a very cool style, and they're also kind of influenced by like the Cal Art stuff, which is like regular show and Adventure Time, all that stuff, which is another like big influence to me. But then like the thing that makes it sort of distinctly British, I think, is this like Beano Viz influence, and like, you know, those like unnecessarily randy postcards from like the seaside.
Yeah,
like the men with huge penile noses and the women with ridiculously large breasts. I'm really into that kind of thing, you know. so that was like to give it a particularly like British feel, and hopefully it's just sort of like a mad soup of all those things. But I also like to think it sort of stands as its own thing as well. It's got its own kind of vibration, I suppose.
absolutely. I first saw the trailer. I was covering Gamescom for RPS, so it was like, Christ knows, 11 p.m. I was doing the live blog that night, and it was all like first-person shooters, and I was tired. And then your game comes on, and it hits me like an explosion of color, and then disappears to the point where I think I'd messaged the Slack channel and was like, "Did I dream that? Was that actually something that was there?" But it is very, very distinct. So I would definitely say it stands up on its own. I read a Guardian article with you both. I think it was from December last year. You mentioned that you'd pitched the game to 80 publishers before it was eventually signed by Panic. Can you say a little bit more about that process and what it felt like to finally be picked up?
Yeah, I mean, there's this big, dreadful spreadsheet with a bunch of like mads. I looked at it the other day. Actually, there's like loads of like weird emoticons that represent like the stages and stuff.
Yeah,
we'll have to share it at some point. It's maybe vaguely interesting.
Yeah.
But basically, after the Good Time Garden, we sort of like just sent that to a bunch of publishers, being like, "Hey, we've done this thing, and we're telling you because we might want to, pitch you a next thing." And so we built this big list, and then basically when we got to the point where we had this playable demo and a pitch deck, we just like filled it with like anyone and everyone who has like a comically large sack of money. And yeah, reached out to a bunch of people, had a bunch of like interesting conversations, a bunch of like really boring conversations. A lot of people like, just didn't get what we were going after. A lot of like really dry like competitor analysis type stuff where it's like, okay, pick 50 games that it's like, and we'll create some like mad statistical analysis of like where we place it in the current market and stuff. And I was like, no guys, we'll just make it good. Don't worry, it's fine. we'll just do a good game, guys. We really promise. And yeah, it was a wild process, but we got on a call with like Panic almost like incidentally because they weren't super high on our radar, but we know like they'd published Goose Game and Firewatch. And then as soon as we kind of like had a group call with them, all these like happy, smiling, enthusiastic Americans from Portland were just like, this is nice, isn't it? Yeah. And yeah, it's a long, protracted thing, like signing a publishing deal and dotting the I's, crossing the T's and stuff. But I think, it's definitely the best decision we made along the way.
Sounds like it. Did you ever actually provide a list of 50 games for that statistical? Like,
no, it maybe wasn't too bad, but it was like, there was a lot of like mad demands of like, where do you place this? And we gotta put it next to anything. It was like, kind of like, well, we're sort of trying to not do it like anything else. Does that fly? But like, I don't know.
You can compare it to maybe like Kez, Big Cook, Little Cook, and a Saturday morning cartoon. But it doesn't really work but I think also probably what we could have done, because I think what we did was we listed the publishers and we were like, all right, let's start at our least favourite and end up at our top favourite or whatever, or what was at a time like what we thought was the best like deal for us. And in hindsight, probably we could have it was good practice, I suppose, but in hindsight, I think there was only maybe like 10 or 15 on there that we would seriously have liked to sign a deal with. And of those 10 or 15, like a couple of them, those conversations went further, but then like in the end, we felt like Panic was just a vibe.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? I think based on their portfolio of work, it feels like a natural fit. I'm absolutely obsessed with the idea of you sitting in a pitch deck meeting with a huge publisher and saying Big Cook, Little Cook just out loud. I haven't thought of that for like 15 years. This is a very, very funny game, and a lot of reviews this week have referred to it as a new high bar for humour in games, which I completely agree with. The game is stuffed with jokes. I don't think it ever lets off the accelerator in that sense. Can you tell me about the process of writing jokes? Like, how do you come up with this amount of stuff?
Listen to him. Jokes is all we've got. Okay, there's nothing else. We had no choice.
Yeah, I'd love to say like we just sit in a room and like the magic happens, but I think it's very fortunate that it's taken this long to make, because that's how long it took to like write all the stuff. Like we would literally like sit like in pre-production. It was just like us in a room just doing stupid voices to each other, but nearly all of it would be like dreadful. Especially when we sat down in front of like a whiteboard or something. We're like, all right, let's do the funny. It was it was really, really painful. But like I think when the good stuff comes out is when we don't even like thinking about it, and we'll just, I don't know, do a stupid voice to one or the other and be like, oh, perfect, that's going in.
Yeah,
and then we'll be quoting it for the next 2 years, and then it'll be realized by some amazing voice actor like I don't know, 3 years down the line.
Yeah,
but yeah, it is a very challenging process, and I think it's one where we sort of like tease it out, and you can only like get so much like per day really.
And also like just doing it within the context of a game is hard too. Like how you can write like a good bit or whatever, but like how does the player even engage with this? Which is why a lot of the stuff just happens kind of at you. Which is, I think, fine, because like if the player gets on board, then they're rewarded for just like sticking around and prodding and poking at the world.
Did you get really good at evaluating each other's suggestions?
I wouldn't say the word is really good, but we.
Yeah, I think that's another part of the process is like what thank goodness is like the very actually quite narrow like overlap of like the Venn diagram of like what me and James think is good, maybe like less like we will consistently find like a lot of stuff good, maybe like overall, but when it comes to like, all right, we've got to sit down and like we're suggesting stuff, more like conceptual stuff, again in the context of like it's got to be a game. How does the game progress as like a narrative and mechanical thing?
Yeah,
we'd both like go away and then bring suggestions to the table. And we'd just be like batting each other's ideas down until one comes up and it's like, okay, what about this? Like a big pie. Like, big pie, oh yeah.
It's tough though because like, sure, there's a lot of little goofs in there, like you say, hopefully it is packed and there's stuff in the background. Very low stakes to draw a poster and stick it in. But some of the more involved story, visual goofs, like it's a lot of work to bring those into fruition. So like, when someone suggests them, you're already picturing like the 2 weeks of work that entails. So it's very easy to be like, well, I just don't really like it that much. So like, I'm gonna feel resentful for 2 weeks, like, and I'm handcrafting this, or hand coding this kind of thing. So it really does. Story beats were the ones that had to be like at least strong enough for us both to invest in.
Yeah, I think there was a benefit of like early on with the first project, or like earlier in this one. Like we hadn't really fully conceptualized like how much work it would take to make any given thing. But yeah, especially like midway through the project where we like had really felt like, oh man, this takes way longer than we thought. We're going to go way over time and budget. It was we felt like we had to like challenge every single idea, and ideas had to really like justify themselves. And also like then fit in the context of like what we'd already done. Because we did it a little bit more conventionally this time around, where we had like a sort of grey box alpha version where we didn't draw everything super high fidelity first. We sort of built that out and then tested it, but then it's quite hard to test just like very low fidelity sketches of like a character jiggling around and just like a wah, 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 wah sound effect in place of the dialogue. It's like, okay, I think this might work, but I don't know. We don't really know until it's done.
That build was probably like funnier than the current one.
Yeah, that was like raw gold, and we've just been like shaving it off.
Yeah, release the sketch cut. That's what I'll be saying.
Yeah, it's sketch comedy with all sketches.
when you said there about, oh, what about a big pie? I sort of feel like watching you two come up with the big pie concept would be a bit like watching Paul McCartney come up with Get Back in that Beatles documentary.
I don't think I'd make the comparison, but I think the big pie thing was like, I remember being on my bike, like I think cycling somewhere, and I had like a voice note, and I'm sure it came from like I was just like spitballing ideas before this, but then I distinctly remember like doing a voice note of being like, big Ron, big pies. Tiny Tom, tiny pies, and then like doing that into my phone.
I love that. It came out fully formed. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite joke? You've been hearing these jokes a lot for 4 years, but is there one that still is funny to you both?
Yeah, it's tough. I think like a lot of the core stuff, which is like the kind of the, I guess what you call like the main missions, that's like just white noise to me now, because it's just, we've gone through so many iterations of that. We've seen so many like versions of like the cutscenes, and I had to like play through it a dozen times. But I think just like the little addendums that came in like relatively recently,
yeah, the freshest is the
still
best.
Squeeze a bit of joy out of those. I really like the worm. That was like the most throwaway character.
Yeah,
that's become my favorite one. Like the sort of little insights about the career paths that worms can take and things.
I think for my money it was and it never gets any love, I noticed. It doesn't get the love it deserves, is when it's in that cutscene with Rog, like the flashback thing, you know, Rog, the guy with the big head, the green grocer, and he's like in PE, and then the PE teacher's like, that pool isn't going to pee itself. Like, I thought that was a moment of magic from Will, but maybe it'll get the fair dues it deserves in the streams.
I guess on a similar note to what we were talking about before, was there anything that got cut or never made it past like that original development stage that you wish had made it into the final game? You're still holding on to like, I think that had a bit of juice to it.
There's a literal character that talks about juice.
Yeah. No way, is there really?
Yeah, Juice Bunks kid. Oh my god.
He's the kid that goes, I'm having a juice bunks. It's my berries and cherries flavored juice bunks. And that's all he says, but like, we just thought he should go in, but he never,
God,
I don't know.
Yeah, he was so early. It was like really early on before. Yeah, we'd even got like the original demo. We were just doing that stupid voice to each other. He was like, I think Big Ron is actually the earliest character, but Juice Bunks Kid is a close second.
Yeah,
and we keep talking about putting him in, and it was only like the other day they were like, when we like submitted everything, pushed all the final builds, and we were just like, Juice Bunks Kid.
He's been left.
Oh no.
He's like Woody has been left by about Andy, just like by the side of the road.
Yeah.
It's not even
there's
developed. It's like all he says is I want a juice box.
Yeah, there's not even like a character design for him anyway. It's just like us doing that line. I have my juice bunk. There's a couple things where like we were sort of limited, like technically maybe, in like a vertical slice, like the kid who wants the tea, the grown man who wants the tea, I should say, for
legal reasons.
Legal reasons. The way it was going to work was like you'd go to the cow and then like physically milk it straight away, and then its udder would like sort of like come loose and slink towards his house like a sort of weird snake like thing, like had a mind of its own, and then jam itself in his teacup, and then you'd have to like go back and forth and slap like a lump of milk through the udder until it exploded. Which that was all kind of like there in the vertical slice, but getting it to work in the sort of the wider context of the world was challenging at one point for some reason. Probably could do it now, but
I think we were also quite precious about like how it worked at the time. Whereas now, I imagine we just be like, yeah, just slap the lump and it shoots off.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. But it was also like maybe too close to the Sigley Simon's long arms. I think that was we were wary of like having lots of things that became weird and ganglion, having that become like the thing. That was also another like hard part of the creative process where we didn't want to give too much weight to any one like concept, especially because like we sort of knew it wasn't going to be so much of a long experience. We're like, okay, yeah, if this goes on for too long or like this with too many callbacks to this, is this now what the game's about? I know for my part, I was very kind of particular about like, it's like, oh no, we've already done this idea a little bit. We can't reuse anything. God forbid we reuse any assets or jokes.
Was it hard to keep it brief?
No, actually, it was hard to make it long. Originally, we were going to make it much longer. We wanted it to be like a really long experience. Like, I think when we pitched it, it was something ridiculous, like 12 hours. I don't know how we thought we'd even deliver on that, but yeah. So like we we found that like I think messing with the structure of the game and how you traverse the world made it short, and then making it short made it easier to put more content in, and the more dense it felt, the better it felt. So we just went further into that the more we got through development, and we got a bit sort of worried that some people might feel shortchanged, but I think that like I say, I like allowing us to put that much density in. People are quite forgiving, hopefully.
Yeah. I think it's exactly the length it needed to be. Like, I felt like it felt like you'd said everything you wanted to say.
Yeah.
However, maybe a director's cut that just has Juicebox Kid in. Like, I think that would be a very funny bit as well. Just one new addition.
Yeah. There's a new playable character, maybe.
So I want to move on to the game's voice cast. They're all fantastic, and their performances are one of the main reasons the game's jokes land as well as they do. We'll get to Matt Berry in a second, but I actually want to focus on John Log Blythe first. I once had Nutella smeared on my face during a live recording of his Regular Features podcast, which is maybe one of my greatest claims to fame. So it feels rude not to ask how Log came to be such an important part of the game.
God, I wish that were me. I might ask him to bring a jar of Nutella to the launch party. Yeah, so I'm a reader as well. Like I love Regular Features. I've been listening for like years.
Nice.
And I think like when we even like coming up with Big Ron, it was always like him in my head. And yeah, it was just like for the longest time. And then we just like reached out to him one day, and he was super stoked. We sent him some like lines, and he sent back just the most incredible line read. I was just stunlocked for the entire day. He's just, it was like, give your wife the best, give her big runs, big pies. And I was like, I think I was literally crying. I'm not ashamed to admit. It was like, that's probably like the highlight of my life.
The one time you've cried.
The last better than the launch of the game. Nothing's going to hit in the same way. And yeah, we just sort of like got him down to a recording studio, and he just knocked out the rest of it. And yeah, some of the ad libs and like improv stuff, or some of like the weirder takes were just like, yeah, this is absolute gold. This is all going in. Yeah,
no, it makes sense. As someone who also has been listening to Regular Features for a long, long time, feels like Big Ron was the role he was born to play. So I'm really happy that you got him on board. Yeah, I also give a shout out to M. Humble, David Ferguson, Peter Sutton, Chris Cantle, and Jack Evans, because they all do a stellar job in this game. How was the recording process, and how did it feel hearing those jokes you'd written be brought to life? I know you've already mentioned what it was like when Log did those readings, but how was it in general?
Yeah, so we reached out to people like mainly or exclusively comedians that we thought would like be a good fit, got them down into the studio, and we kind of had a really strong idea of everything down to the cadence. Again, because we've just been like saying it to each other for so long. We knew like every line and like how it should sound and like the beats of it all. But yeah, basically everyone was able to bring like a little bit of new life into it.
Yeah,
like there was a lot. We made some room for like improv in most sessions, and yeah, no, it was surreal, especially when people just like nailed it first time.
Yeah,
we'd sort of say it to them as like, okay, just sort of do it this way, and then they do it and be like, wow, incredible, that's Florence, perfect. And oftentimes we'd just all just be in stitches. Like it was, so hearing someone else say it apart from us was like, sort of like freshened it up and made it funny again to us. So we're just like loving it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was also nice, just everyone just was sick right off the bat, which was really good. There was not a moment where I was like, is this really working? Just like, I guess we just hopefully we picked right and got lucky a little bit. But yeah, like we'll say, for so long we were like set on the cadence of things, because it's been me and Will saying it back to each other for the last 2 years, and I think at one point we didn't even know if we were going to get voice actors, because we do a lot of characters as well, but we thought we might do even like a lot more of them. But I think bringing people in was such a good move, because it's just like, like Will say, it's freshened it up, and just like the characters just feel a lot fuller and less like homogenous, because I think you're sort of in danger of the town feeling a bit too homogenous when everyone's the same voice.
I mean, I have to ask about Matt Berry. How did Matt Berry get involved?
He came to us and he said, "Boys, I loved the Good Time Garden so much. I'll pay you." No, that was basically a Make-A-Wish from Panic. They were like, "What's a big goal you'd like, or a big like treat kind of thing? What's like because this is one of the cool things about Panic is they'll just say yes and to like kind of whatever you put forward. So they're really down to just like try weird cool stuff. I mean, this is a company that like made a handheld gaming console with no experience with a crank. So like right at the start, they were like, "Do you have anything like that?" And we were like, "Yeah, maybe a cool voice actor." And we just sort of almost pulled Matt Berry out of nowhere. I mean, we're obviously huge fans of him, but we just thought like, that's a vibe, right? And then it was in the works for ages and ages. And then one day they turned around and they were like, "Yeah, okay, Matt Berry's ready to join you on a video call on Monday. So have you got 4 hours worth of jokes?" And we were like, "No."
Oh, wow. How was it meeting him? Surreal or like weirdly normal?
A kind of a bit of both, yeah, because it's like a professional setting. We like there to do a job, so it was like, okay, let's get cracking. But it also was just like, holy shit, it's really him.
It was strange too, because it wasn't like we were in the studio with him. He was on a video call, so he was just sort of this like voice from the void that would come back.
Oh wow,
yeah,
okay.
It might not have been him. It could have been an impersonator, for all we know.
Just getting absolutely rinsed by that TikTok impression guy.
Yeah,
I was about to say that guy. Do you know if he's seen or played the game? Or did he just disappear back into the ether sort of once the recording sessions were over?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything from him. I hope so. I don't know, but he's not super public anyway, is he? He's quite private, and he doesn't tend to promote the things he's in. He's focuses on his music a bit, I think, but I don't know. I hope in the privacy of his own home he's been either appalled or overjoyed by it.
I'm sure it's the latter. Are any of the characters based on real people?
Yeah, we get this question a bit, and like understandably, but kind of not at all, really. And I don't know if that was like a deliberate decision, but I think we were sort of like crafting first and foremost like this like fictional thing. Even though it's like it's kind of ostensibly set in Barnsley, it's this like definitely like imagined like surreal version of it. And although there are a lot of distinct characters in Barnsley, it never felt like appropriate or like it really made much sense to sort of like pick any one person out. I think the kind of the inhabitants of Barnsworth are sort of in a way their own thing.
The game has a darker surrealist side to it that cuts through its otherwise whimsical tone. Can you tell me a bit more about these sections and how they came to be?
Yeah, I think we with the Good Time Garden, obviously this is a big psychedelic experience, but we weren't super confident how we'd scale that up to like a feature length thing. So part of arriving in like it being more of a town was it came from that, was like, all right, we want to like ground it a bit more and have somewhere we can like ramp up from. But we did always kind of like want to do the sort of like it gets weird, you know. And in like earlier sort of iterations, it got a lot weirder. Like really sort of like I don't know, clocks melting, off the wall kind of stuff. But I don't know. It's sort of like we struggled to like ramp up in a way that like felt like it made sense. We were having it seemed to be working with a sort of like the more like middle ground. Like it's absurd, surreal, but it's not like there's something spooky going on with the town. Like it's like textually as if. I think like really, really early on there was going to be stuff where like, there's these sort of like, what's the guy, like not Geiger, Clive, like sort of Clive Barker-esque sort of weirdness going on, and there was going to be like these entities and things, but it just didn't feel like it was going to work. And what was working was the more like sort of kind of grounded absurdist stuff. But we still wanted to kind of poke a little bit into that sort of weirdness. So I think like sort of what we call like the zone areas where it's like, it's the meat zone or the ale zone or whatever, where things get like a bit bizarre or like more bizarre than they are in the sort of the outer levels.
Yeah.
That's something we still wanted to explore, and we're glad we got those in.
And they can be separate from everything else. Like the feeling of digging down and going back up for air was like something we very intentionally did. Like the further away you get from the town centre or the market square or the like allotment, then like the stranger it gets, and then hopefully when you come back into those spaces you feel more grounded.
No, I think you've definitely nailed that balance. On a very similar point, you spoke a bit before about the game's influences, and you've mentioned other ones too. So we said, Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer's work, Mighty Boosh, Dick and Dom in the Bungalow, which I really love as an influence. My sister was absolutely obsessed with that when we were younger. So yeah, the through line between those things, to thank goodness, I think are very clear. But I'm curious because you're, sorry if this is wrong, you are both creators in your 20s. Were there any online influences that informed the game's tone?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I definitely grew up like watching Salad Fingers and all the other David Firth stuff. So I think that like bizarre Weeble stuff, which like feels a little dated now, obviously, but like at the time was like I was obsessed with. So I think like that's wormed its way in there somehow. And a lot of the like viral Newgrounds artists of like the 2000s were a huge influence on me, I think.
Yeah, I think Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared was probably, I wouldn't say it's like on the mood board, but it was definitely like sort of something we were aware of like how close we were approaching that.
Yeah,
I think it was definitely a point of reference in terms of like, oh, it's something cute and colourful, but then it gets spoopy. And I think like when it came out at the time, that was like kind of new and fresh and was, obviously affecting. But by the time we came around to doing it, it's sort of a bit played out. Obviously the TV series they did was like sick.
It's a whole new thing,
like, yeah, freshen up the formula and it was really rad. But like, I guess the point of reference that like came out during production, I think. So like early on, a point of reference was like the web series and the original shorts. But yeah, it was something that sort of like we were sort of balancing sort of off that was like, okay. But the cutesiness and stuff is definitely an influence. And like in that little live action promotional thing, there was kind of, I don't know, people correctly point out that it was sort of approaching Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
Yeah.
In those.
So I haven't watched that TV show. You've reminded me I really need to get on that.
It's so sick. Yeah, it's
really
like
good?
they'd somehow like up from what they made before and make a whole new thing. It's awesome.
Oh, sweet. Oh, well, I'll have to check that out. Thank you. I appreciate the recommendation. Do you have any favourite characters? Is that unfair to ask? Is it Juicebox Boy?
I think, I like Florence a whole bunch just because of what M. Humble did with her voice, and she just feels like such a full character, I think. And I feel for her, She's not had it easy. Usually the ones I like the most are the ones that somebody else voices or the ones that Will voices, because it's like very different to like what I'm expecting. So I think some of those characters are really, really good. Like Will mentions, the Worm is a personal favourite.
Yeah. Worm's a big favourite of my partner's when we played it together the other week.
Because it's just like, it starts with, hello, I'm a worm, which is like the most basic place to start. But somehow it comes back around into being good. It's like, you can't just...
That was a product of like, playtesting at Gamescom. Like, so that was like, that sequence was in like one of the early public demos. And when you like get stuck, it like dropped into the well, it's a bunch of people weren't sure where to go. We're like, oh god, it's not gonna work. So then, like after a certain amount of time, the worm pops out and does its bit.
Yeah,
sort of resolve the issue. That's classic game design. Just make a little guy pop out of the hole. I like obviously Big Ron, Tiny Tom. I think contains with him in him a lot of frustrations that really resonate with me.
There's a lot of you in Tiny Tom, yeah.
The sort of the other gardener, like Anti-Snail Sue. I don't know how many. So there's a sidebar, but like a lot of these characters we all know the names of, but I don't think you're ever like mentioned directly like in the game.
Yeah.
So I don't want to reveal too deep a secret lore. But yeah, Anti-Snail Sue is what we call her. She's the one that complains that snails don't taste good.
I knew exactly who you were talking about straight away, but I think it's because I've been speaking to a couple of people who also reviewed it, and maybe we've all developed the same shorthand that you have for these characters. That's great. I love Worm as game navigation. I hope that becomes a fixture of the industry moving forward. I'm looking forward to the GDC talk about
worm
that.
posting.
Worm posting.
Have you got a favourite? Not to get too self-gratifying.
Oh, do I have a favourite? Sausage guy.
The guy behind the fence.
Oh my god. I think it sort of made my partner feral. Like she was, every time we were back down that alley, she was like, oh my god, I hope he's got more sausages to push through. And I think there is one run where maybe no sausages get poked through.
Yeah. Was it the shops? Is it the shops to get more sausages?
Yes, I think it's in between that. And she was like, if he does not come back, like, I'm going to be so disappointed by this game.
That was another one that was very late in development. And like,
was it?
Yeah, we were like, what if there's nothing in this spot? Like, what could there be here? And it was like very quickly, almost too late in development to put in like these kind of things, but we just like couldn't help ourselves. It's like,
That's
I think
funny.
one of those when they, hello there, I've got a sausage here. And that was enough. That was enough legs somehow.
Yeah. And that's usually the way, isn't it? We just do like their sort of like their classic line, and then we're like, okay, yeah, that works, great, let's go in.
Yeah.
We I don't know if we spoke about it earlier, but like there was a point, we had this like alpha grey boxy version of the game that was basically how it existed for like months and months and months, and we only got to a point where we could like feasibly play test like very late last year.
Oh wow!
But then when we got in front of people, it just didn't work. It was like originally it was like it was an open world, and you could do the jobs in like a different order.
Yeah,
like a vaguely different order. It kind of came back around to the same thing, but there was like 3 cutscenes for the guy, the sickly guy waking up. We had to do based on like which of those things you did last and stuff.
Yeah, you could wake up 3 ways, couldn't he?
Yeah, it was really involved and it was really hard to track. But we found in playtesting, like players would just like get stuck on these like loops in like the wrong part of the town. And we'd assumed that like they'd build up like the mental model of how to navigate the world. Because it's simple, you go down the alleyway, you go up the telegraph pole, you go along the roof, you go down the chimney, through his house, onto the shed, across the garden, down the well, through the well, up the sewer. It's just no one ever got it really, understandably so. So we had to like very, very late in the game put it just kind of on rails and figure out, okay, how do we like map this sort of like semi-branching thing into just like a literal like line. We had this like actual like flow chart and stuff. We had to just like, all right, take this goes here, and then you go here, and figure out how you'd like what's the ideal playthrough, and sort of like force a player onto that. So, but I think that we didn't really lose anything. I think that definitely fixed it, and it also allowed us to like introduce these new bits that like I don't know, like Charlie poking out through the fence to open it up. At one point, that was just always open, and you could always go through it. And again, miss the thing you were supposed to do, but now it does add these like new goofs and gaffs that felt like it worked.
I have 2 things to say based on what you've just said there. One, it's absolutely wild to me that you looked at that one alleyway and thought there's something missing there, because that one alleyway in of itself is full of so many jokes. So I think it really speaks to how that's why there's jokes everywhere. In terms of like making it, I guess, quote unquote, more on rails, that is very late in development to do that. Like, I can't imagine the conversations you must have been having at that point where you realize that must have been the direction, or that something had to change. That's wild.
Yeah, it was a very big say. I think I remember like when we started doing playtesting, like we gave it off to Panic, and they did a bunch of stuff, and then all the videos came back with more or less the same result. And luckily, it was sort of a simultaneous epiphany that we both had. We both came to the office and were like, listen, and then almost in chorus like, let's put the whole thing on rails. So luckily we were like fully agreed, but I think it would have been a very hard conversation to months before then be like, let's just break the bones of this whole thing and change how it works, because it was a ball ache to like change the structure of it even after we decided it was the thing to do.
Game development is I don't know how anything ever gets published. I really don't. Like, that's absolutely wild.
I've got so much more respect now for like weirdly AAA games where I'm like, it's GTA 5 is a fucking miracle. Like, the fact that it even exists is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on compliance apps at the moment, and I don't even know how they get it. Never mind something interactive and with all this stuff in.
Yeah.
So by the time people are listening to this, the game will be out. What's next for Cold Supper?
A big sit down Wii for me.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. What a treat.
Wow. I might have a bath, I think.
Yeah.
Never the twain shall mix though.
Yeah. Unless I really want to.
I absolutely love that. I'm going to take that as the only answer.
That's all we've got.
Both bathroom related as well. As always, we'll end this episode with a chat about our hyperfixations. We do this in every episode of Indieventure, which are things we're obsessed with at the time of recording. These things could be anything, a game, a movie, a book, maybe like a nice lamp you found at a charity shop. James, do you have a current hyperfixation you'd like to talk about?
Yes, I do. Well, I wouldn't say I'm one to get hyperfixated on cultural items. I'm more, I guess, I get hyperfixated on various concerns and worries in my life, but they're not very fun for podcasts. But
we can get into it if it'll be helpful.
Yeah.
We normally turn into a therapy
Work out some
podcast in the
issues.
second hour.
But no, I've been listening to the Do Nothing album for ages. I mean, it's not like a new album or anything. So yeah, Snake Sideways from Do Nothing.
Nice. That's it. I've not heard that, but I will check that out immediately afterwards. What genre of music is it?
It's, I guess you call it indie, but it's sort of like the singer just has like this authoritative but like world weary take on things, and it's all about sort of his personal anxieties, and but he just does it with, it somehow manages like this world weariness and like passion at the same time in the album. It's just a cool listen.
That sounds incredibly my shit. So yeah, I'll
give it
try that out immediately. What about you, Will?
Yeah, I've sort of like got into, I don't know what you call it, like civil engineering or like city planning type stuff, but like in a super amateur way, where I watch like a couple YouTube like video essays and then now have opinions about intersections and like, they should really do something about this. We should put some bike lanes in here. We should, I don't know. We should grass all this up. Let's grass this up. Stuff it up.
Have you any idea how useful this would have been like 4 years ago when we were planning the town? And all of a sudden we're done.
No, it would have done. Yeah, no, I'm super into. Well, I say into that. I think what I'm into is just like watching YouTube video essays and the sort of the feeling of like learning that gives you in the place of actually reading a book.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Liam? Have you got a current hyperfixation?
Well, I will tell you one, but before then, Will, it's really funny. Like 3 months ago, my hyperfixation was city planning and civil engineering. I got really hooked on a YouTube channel called City Planner Plays, who is an actual civil engineer. I don't know whether you've heard of this guy.
Oh, okay. Is it like where he's playing like City Skylines or something? Or?
Yeah, so that was like my gateway drug into sort of real world stuff. But I was just really hungover one Saturday and could barely move, and just ended up watching like 6 hours of his videos about, arterial roads and where high schools need to be placed. And it's really interesting.
It is fascinating. It like makes you like, I don't know, like think about, I don't know, your place in society and how everything is just sort of like designed. Everything around us is just like a series of like people's decisions and stuff, and how those come about. Interesting, yeah.
And also the decisions of people like 200 years ago.
Totally.
Before then, some
Yeah.
Romans decided that a bar's gonna, like a road's gonna go between a pub and a toilet, and now like that's a high street.
Yeah, we went to the States to visit the publishers a couple of months back. Obviously, they have the sort of like the grid system, which sucks. It was horrible. It's so confusing. It's like, I'm so glad like our cities are like a complete tangled mess of like ancient highways and footpaths that have just been like concreted over. Yeah, it rocks.
They're so much more interesting. I agree. And whenever I'm in America, that's always my take is, God, these places are so sterile in their design. But I'm currently learning to drive, and I would like to meet whoever came up with the concept of spiral roundabouts, because it's giving me more grief than I care to admit. No, those are cool. Thank you. I appreciate you humoring us on that. I'll be very quick with mine, I guess. Mine is Childish Gambino's new album, Bando Stone in the New World, which
nice.
I've absolutely been obsessed with. And it's meant to be tied to a movie. I don't know if you know about this. It's meant to be like his final album, and it's also tied to a film that he's in. But I saw a Reddit thread earlier where a bunch of fans were saying, well, it's not a real movie and you've been had as the fool. And that's even more interesting. Yeah.
I think I saw a clip of the trailer, yeah. So that's just like not real, and it's all that's rad. People should do more stuff like that.
Yeah, tricking their fans. That's the key.
Because it contains clips in the album of Donald Glover, the actor, acting in this movie.
Yeah.
And obviously he tries to keep those two parts of him separate. I sort of love this idea that the movie is a soundtrack to a film that Donald Glover stars in that might not exist, that contains clips from a movie that might not exist, and is also the final album under the name Childish Gambino.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rules.
like I say, I do compliance apps. I've had a lot of time to think. So thank you to the two of you, and good luck for tomorrow. I mean, based on the reviews this week, I think it's going to go incredibly well for you both. The game is fantastic. I had an absolute great time playing it. Incredible game. Best of luck to you both. Can't wait to see what happens next. And yeah, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast.
Amazing. Thanks for having us, Liam.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, thanks for the kind words. Much appreciated.
Yeah, for sure.
Indieventure is a video games podcast created, produced, hosted, and edited by Rachel Watts, Rebecca Jones, and me, Liam Richardson. For more information, including a list of every game we mentioned in this episode, make sure to check out our website, indieventurepodcast.co.uk. You can get in touch by sending your questions, comments, and feedback to contact@indieventurepodcast.co.uk. You can support the show by rating us 5 stars and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast provider of choice. Some of the games we talk about on the show may have been provided to us for free for review consideration. Our intro music and stings were composed for us by Ollie Newbury. Check the episode description to hear more of his excellent tunes. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks for another episode of Indieventure. Bye for now.